Yeah, what are you doing? What are you doing? What?
Hiking with this.
What is that? Stop walking away from me.
It's a stream.
Okay, so why are you bouncing around all the way? You have any ID on you?
No.
Don't go anywhere. Alright, just relax.
You okay?
Okay, I'm okay, I'm okay! Ah! 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 Stay down.
I'm okay. I'm okay.
I'm okay! Don't move. Do you understand?
No, I'm okay.
Stop moving!
I am okay.
Don't you move, you understand?
Yeah. I need help.
Don't move.
I need help.
Don't stop moving.
So one of the biggest challenges that we have, of course, is to discern and make that judgment between someone who may have a disability and somebody who is in fact on drugs or alcohol. Hi, my name is Brett Sackett, and I am finishing up my 28-year career with the Sonoma County Law Enforcement. Last 11, I've been the police chief for the city of Sonoma. Some of the training that we put together, going back in California first and foremost, interacting with people with disabilities is part of the basic police academy, and it's also required in California for ongoing professional standards training. So every couple years we have an additional update about interacting with people with disabilities. But that's the minimum, and I don't think any of us want to train to the minimum. So there are numerous nonprofits and educational institutions that provide additional training for law enforcement. And so I really encourage you as professionals to really train your staff, utilize these resources so that you can learn about the newest and best ways to interact with people with disabilities. I think one of the challenges that we have in law enforcement, as you know, is when we come on scene, we're required to make judgments on very little information. And so knowing some of the signs of autism in those people who may have communication disabilities is really an important thing. So one is kind of recognizing some of the signs, whether it's flapping of hands or rocking back and forth, or understanding that they don't like bright lights or loud noises. And so knowing that, understanding it, recognizing it can put us both in a position of much greater safety. We really encourage, whether it's parents or care providers, to really try to instill, to whatever level you can, respect for law enforcement and the importance it is to follow direction. Conversely, it's our responsibility as law enforcement professionals to really get out there to try to meet our community. So if you have homes for autistic adults or disabilities, that you get out there, you interact with them, you create relationships so you know who they are. Of course, much easier in small communities like ours as opposed to larger communities, but I think the more that you know your community, the better we're going to be. So there have been several incidents I can think of where our training has been beneficial to us. One off the top of my head I can think of is when we were responded to a call at a local market where somebody was acting out. So when we got down there, it was obvious to us that there was quite a bit of turmoil going on inside one of the aisles. And so when we slowed down and kind of looked at it, we recognized that the behavior that they were exhibiting were more indicative of somebody who may have a disability. We were able to slow down, clear the area, speak, softly and quietly to them, and eventually gain enough rapport with them that we're able to address what their issues were. We located their care provider and we reunited them, and we had a very successful outcome on that.
My name is Alexis Braswell, and I work at the Red Barn. The Red Barn is a therapeutic equine center that works with children and adults with special needs. We work with children with a wide variety of disabilities, many of whom have communication disorders. The role of horses when working with children with communication disorders is that horses provide an opportunity to be a voice for that child in a situation where they might not otherwise have one. Horses by nature are prey animals, so they operate out of a fight or flight response, much like a child with a disability or a communication disorder might. So in a stressful or scary situation, their first reaction is going to be to flee. Much like some of our children, when put in a stressful situation, they might also flee, which could in turn look like they are trying to avoid getting in trouble for something that they may or may not have done. Horses don't communicate using words. Horses communicate non-verbally, which is the same way that a lot of our children communicate. So in working with the horses, you have to be very aware of the signals that they're giving you and how you're impacting them. So you have to not only be attuned to them, but to yourself as well. So you need to be able to approach them in a quiet and controlled manner, being aware of if they're asking you to stop or to back off. Horses have space bubbles just like we do. Some kids with disabilities, or really people in general, have different size space bubbles. So it might be that 10 feet away is as close as you can get. And we need to be able to see those signs and respect that and say, okay, I can take a step back and give you the space that you need, but not interpret that space as guilt or trying to avoid them or flee the scene. Before I approach a horse, the first thing I want to do is check in with myself and make sure that I am calm. I'm not thinking about a lot of other things going on in my world, that I'm focused and in the moment. Horses force you to be present, which is very important. Once I start approaching the horse, I make sure that I approach them slowly and that I'm paying attention to any signs they might be giving me and that I'm respecting that. If they're telling me to stop, I stop and I wait until they invite me into their space again. I know when a horse is welcoming me or inviting me back into their space when they return back to a relaxed state. So they might go from looking really alert or irritated that I'm approaching them to maybe dropping their head and relaxing their eye a little bit, or just turning to greet me instead.
My name is Lee Hutchison, and this is my mom, Cheryl. She's right next to me, and I have autism.
When we were raising Lee and trying to make him respectful of those people in authority, police officers, etc., we unfortunately inadvertently made him afraid because we wanted to impart to him that it was extremely important that he listen and follow directions, and that police officers may take it as non-compliance if he were difficult, and that could cause a problem. So in doing that, we made Lee a little bit nervous. And when Lee gets nervous, he gets very talkative, but not very coherent.
Sometimes I be dramatic as well.
Yes, he will be very dramatic sometimes, and he doesn't follow directions very well. So directions have to be very simplistic and
in a way that I can understand it in a certain way.
The biggest thing is whatever you're going to do, you need to tell him what that is. If someone is going to approach him and say they need to pat him down or something like that, you would not want to try to touch him without letting him know what you're going to do, because that would be considered invasive and something that would very much trigger an anxiety response.
Even if it's needed to be done on normal people.
Right. In our neighborhood, we've only been there a couple of years, so a lot of the people in the neighborhood don't really know Lee. They don't know him when he walks around the neighborhood. And of course, people notice if there's a strange person walking around. We had a case where he texted me and said that there was a police officer driving around in the neighborhood. And as a mom, I went, oh my gosh, is there a problem? Thankfully, nothing came of it, but I always do wonder, do the police officers have the training to pull up and say, hey, do you live in the neighborhood? Obviously, they're going to say that to most people, but he may not even respond. I think most of the parents here will tell you can almost pick these kids out. Once you've sort of seen enough of them and sort of they stand a certain way, they walk a certain way. It's a little bit stereotypical, I guess. But to notice those things and say, hey, this kid's not just ignoring me, they don't get it. But if you turn that siren on, you turn those lights on, they're going to go into panic mode.
My name is Shelley Jones, and I'm a speech therapist. I have 27 years experience as a speech therapist working with students with receptive and expressive language disorders. I am also a past certified therapeutic writing instructor. I come to this conversation with a unique perspective of understanding the communication needs of children and understanding how horses react in stressful situations. Horses react when they are frightened in stressful situations by running away. When they don't understand the situation, their first reaction is a fear response. Children with communication disorders often react the same way that horses do in that perspective. It is so interesting to me when working with students with communication disorders, and how they respond is very similar to my work with horses. Students with communication disorders often don't understand what is being asked of them, and they aren't able to express what they want. Horses live in that same exact world. Children with communication disorders can often be confused with someone who is being belligerent or disrespectful, or simply not obeying what you're asking them to do. If you think back to the Charlie Brown teacher that we've all seen on the cartoon, where we hear the teacher sounding like wah wah, wah wah, wah wah, children with receptive language disorders, particularly in a stressful situation, hear language in much the same way. They literally don't understand the words that are being spoken to them. So you can assume that they are unable to follow your directions. Most have been taught the universal sign for help. The hand is placed in front, a fist is formed with a thumbs up and lifted up. Most children will understand that you are there to help them when you give them this sign. May I suggest that the first thing that you want to do when you encounter a child is ask them their name. First, that lets you know if they're able to understand the command. And second, it lets you know if they're able to respond to you appropriately. Wait for up to 10 seconds for that response. If you ask a child their name and they do not respond appropriately, some common behaviors would include them looking away from you, giving you no eye contact at all. They may run away from you and leave the situation. The second thing you would want to do is ask them to follow a simple command, like hold up your hands and show me your hands and fingers. You also want to wait up to 10 seconds for that child to respond. This lets you know that the child can follow your command. They may not be able to speak, but you know that they're understanding what you're saying to them. Remember to use as little words as possible. Children with communication disorders are often confused by too many words. Speak slowly and clearly and on their level.
My name is Erin McInerney. I have autism, bipolar 1, and severe ADHD. It's hard for me to communicate to those when I'm nervous or scared, because with my ADHD and bipolar and autism, it makes my anxiety it goes to an extremely high level, and so that impacts my ability to talk to others, and they usually can't understand me as well because of my diagnosis. If I ever need to talk to someone with authority, it would be nice for them to know. Because of my diagnosis, it's hard for me to know if I did the right or wrong thing, because I have a hard time thinking deciding if I did something wrong or not. And also with knowing that, I would like them to also know that if they were ever to approach me or someone else with special needs or mental illnesses, to walk slowly and change their attitude to not scare me or anyone else, and to talk slowly and softly to try to assure me or someone else that you're not gonna hurt them and everything's gonna be okay and you just want to talk and ask questions. So approaching a horse, what you do is when you get into wherever the horse is, you walk slowly and then stop every few steps and then wait for the horse to acknowledge you and then to make sure if they're okay for you to keep walking and to know when they're like, you're about to get into my personal bubble, you need to back up and stop. So that's kind of, for me, how if I was to be approached by a police officer then I would like the police officer to approach me that way instead of just walking up. When I get anxious, I stumble talking, I back up or like start walking, or depends if it's really bad anxiety, I would like turn and like walk extremely fast, like as fast as I can. And sometimes I look guilty even if I did nothing wrong.
I'm Temple Grandin, professor of animal science at Colorado State University. And when I was a young child, I had no speech until age 4. I was diagnosed with autism. And autism can vary from geniuses that build things at Silicon Valley to somebody who maybe cannot dress themselves. But some of the basic principles is they can be sensitivity to bright lights, sensitivity to sound, but their brain is like a slow computer. It's like a phone on a single bar. And when you ask them something, it takes time for that web page to load. That's the web page that gives them the language. When I was a little kid, people would touch me and would tend to pull away. And there's some people with autism that can, this is a sensory oversensitivity, react to, being suddenly touched. Remember this principle: sudden surprises scare. So let's say it's someone with autism and you had to put the handcuffs on them. If you were just calm and you explain what you were going to do, they'll probably cooperate. If you just get mad and start doing this, then you're, big guy with autism, nonverbal guy with autism will probably fight you. If you got a young child and is having a tantrum, the police aren't going to be afraid of the young child. But the problem is when you got an adult man having a meltdown from sensory overload. That looks really scary. People with autism and a horse are animals where a sudden surprise scares them. Let's talk about stimming. Okay, let's say a police officer was at a shopping center or just out in the city street and you see someone going like this. That could be stimming. And people with autism do that when they get really nervous. So you see this kind of behavior or maybe rocking, that's stimming. And they just do that to calm down. And that's harmless. There was a horrible case with a friend of mine. His son in his 20s drove, had a job, got pulled over, froze. And the police ended up breaking the windows, a complete mess. When you have difficulties in the brain, processing speed is slowed way down, so maybe you'd freeze. Or maybe he's going to be going like this. And that's definitely a stereotyping. A lot of people with autism don't do good eye contact. He might be just sitting looking ahead and not do eye contact. You've got to give them time to respond. It's just like you keep clicking on stuff on your computer and it finally just freezes and it's not going to work. So that's where the officer needs to stay calm to give them time to respond. That is one of the most important things that the officer needs to know. They are like a phone on one bar, and it takes time to respond. And that'd be true for autism, cerebral palsy, stuttering, and even just anxiety problems.
I'm Laura Vogel. I'm an occupational therapist. I worked with children with disabilities for about 35 years. I'm now faculty at the University of Alabama at Birmingham in the Occupational Therapy Department. My specialty area has always been children and adults with cerebral palsy. So cerebral palsy is a condition that occurs before, during, or soon after birth. And it displays itself as a disability of movement. So these children don't move the same as typically developing children. It also is a problem with postural control. So some of these children can't hold themselves upright. They can't hold their head up. There are many conditions that occur with cerebral palsy. So some of those can be problems talking. Sometimes they can have problems seeing and hearing, and sometimes they have intellectual disabilities. Somebody with cerebral palsy may walk differently. They may lurch from one side to the other. They may stumble a lot. They may walk with a pronounced limp so that one leg moves more than the other leg. Their arms may be held up in what we call a high guard position. They can have one arm tightly by their side and the other one moving, depending on the level of their motor impairment. When they talk, they may be difficult to understand. Some of these children are in wheelchairs. Sometimes the motor impairments and the speech impairments of a person with cerebral palsy can cause their behavior to be misinterpreted as something else. And because of that, and because of the slow speed of response sometimes that you see in children who have this disability, people assume that they're slow to respond because they don't understand, and that is not always the case.
I'm Dr. Jan Rao, and I'm the coordinator for the Tourette Syndrome and Tic Disorders Program of Children's of Alabama. I'm also the co-director for the Center of Excellence for UAB and Children's of Alabama. I'm an occupational therapist, and I have a specialty in Tourette syndrome. The diagnosis of Tourette syndrome is when a person has 2 motor tics and 1 vocal tic that have persisted past a year, and the onset of those tics is before the age of 18. A tic disorder, which is the larger umbrella that everything falls under, is when a person has only motor tics or only vocal tics, but they don't have a combination of the 2. Vocal tics, sometimes known as phonic tics, are sounds that you make, again, that you don't necessarily want to be making. So it could be something as simple as a throat clear or a clicking sound, or it could be stating words or phrases, sometimes even cuss words and rude or socially inappropriate kinds of comments as well. Those kinds of statements are referred to as coprolalia. Coprolalia, which is the most known tic, is that tic, that vocal tic that happens when people cuss or say obscene things or make rude statements or socially inappropriate kinds of statements. It's actually one of the rarest tics that there are, and it happens in less than 10% of the Tourette or tic population. And so that you understand how large that population is, 1 in 100 people have tic disorder or Tourette syndrome. So it's important for people to understand that while this is a rare tic, it can still happen and does still happen. Something that can happen with people who have Tourette syndrome, especially if they have coprolalia, is that in predicaments where they're feeling threatened, they say the very thing they know they're not supposed to say. So for instance, when they're in airports, the very thing that they say is, "I have a bomb," or "I'm a terrorist." They know that that's the thing that they shouldn't say, and it's the very thing that they've been extremely fearful about their entire ride to the airport and with every step that they take walking through the airport, especially as they approach TSA security. So when they see you as a police officer and worry that they might tic in front of you, the only thing that does is escalate their anxiety about their tics. And you are absolutely going to see and hear every tic they have. And it can look crazy and it can sound crazy.
Hi, my name is Min. I have Tourette syndrome, and I am part of the 10% of people with Tourette syndrome who has coprolalia, which is the tic where you swear or say things that are like inappropriate to say, like if a bald man walks by and yell, "Oh my God, you're bald!" this can be kind of weird for people who don't know me and know that I have Tourette's. They kind of think I'm a little weird and stuff, and they do get offended. I try to explain that, no, it's really fine. Police officers, in my experience, have been very kind when they understand what is going on, but when they don't know what's going on, it's kind of a little confusing because they don't know why I'm acting a little out of the norm of, I hate cops, of what other people kind of act like. For a cop or someone of authority to kind of know what to do, kind of just ask if they, I don't know, just ask what's kind of going on before kind of jumping to conclusions. And most people with Tourette's, they'll be able to fully explain that it's a tic, you don't mean any of it, and it's just part of being someone with Tourette's. When I go to airports, I yell bombs away. I yell bomb in an airport, which is very, very not okay. And the TSA have been, for the most part, very nice about it when they know what's going on, but when they don't know what's going on, and I have Tourette syndrome, and it's not me just trying to be a little jerk, they can be very aggressive towards me, just because it is such an improper thing to do, especially at an airport.
Hi, I'm JC Dugard, and I am the founder and president of the Jace Foundation.
Hi, I'm Dr. Rebecca Bailey, and I'm a psychologist on the advisory board for the Jace Foundation. Together, JC and I created the LEO program, which stands for Law Enforcement Training Program.
I created the Jace Foundation when I was recovered in 2009. I really wanted to give back in working with Rebecca and what she did with horses. Really wanted to give the same kind of feeling that we had with my family in our reunification process. So created the Jace Foundation to give that back to other families that needed a safe place to come after a trauma, after a kidnapping, after a murder, any kind of traumatic experience. The law enforcement officer program came when we were talking, and we really wanted to use my story as a way to give officers a better understanding of their job. When I was first approached, when I was found, it was really hard because it felt very aggressive, and I didn't really know how to respond. I didn't know how to use my voice, and so they thought that I wasn't being cooperative. Like I really couldn't speak at all, and I wonder if the officers just knew to back off just a little bit. There was a female officer that came in, and instead of trying to tell me that I had done something wrong and that I was in trouble and that my kids were going to be taken away from me, she said, you know what, everything's going to be okay. We're going to figure this out. Why don't you just sit down? And I said, I can't. I want to tell you, but I just can't. I can write it down. And that was something that, worked for me. There's been times with the horses, that I've realized in the way I approach them, really means a lot. I've had those aha moments.
Really important. What we also kind of encourage law enforcement and ourselves to do is sort of take a moment when you're in a safe situation and assess what's in front of you. So, for example, we have a horse that when you want her to maybe step back 1 or 2 steps, you have to understand her language. And her language is be clear, be strong, but don't be too strong. If you do too strong, it's going to fluster her. When we do this around the country with other people's horses, we find that it is a universal message that horses can teach people. So we use this particular exercise to remind people particularly in law enforcement, to take a second and try to assess what the language of this person is in front of you when you know there's not a threat. What might happen is if you come in with, let's say, too much energy, force, too loud a voice to get her to stand back, what you might get is a horse that gets very frazzled and says, I don't know what you want right now. And then the goal of having her take 3 simple steps back is gone. So we really feel that when we work with horses, that this is a great way to get law enforcement to see that if your goal is resolution of the problem or resolution in the situation, you want to take a moment to see what effect a voice might have, a gesture might have, and sometimes we forget that in our hurry to do a job quickly, get it done. So what I learned and my team members learned from JC and her family was the importance of having a more organic experience in order to understand what they'd been through and also to support awareness in the environment. So when we first created the LEO program, the law enforcement program, the intention was to use her story to teach others. But what we began to find out was many law enforcement officers often would use the same approach in different situations with different types of victims of crimes. And so we began to say, well, how can we create an enjoyable, fun program that can really bring home the message of adjusting your approach to the individual that's in front of you? Psychologists are really big on acronyms. And what we found, surprisingly, is that law enforcement can be too. So we sat down with the folks at Red Barn and we thought, okay, what can we use to explain the message of our program? And came up with the acronym HORSE, which stands for?
H stands for help. You know, when you're approaching somebody, you want to give the impression that you're helping them instead of being forceful and kind of in my case, you know, they were a little bit too forceful and I felt like I couldn't talk to them. O is for observe. You know, you want to tune in to your surroundings and their surroundings and what's going on, what could be causing, you know, their behavior. And then there's R.
R is one of my personal favorites. R stands for respect. Respect each other and respect the space. Very important working with communication disorders and for a variety of reasons. S is a tough one for many of us. S is slow down. We have a little horse here, a miniature horse, who teaches this better than any human being could possibly. If you walk up to this little guy quickly, off like a bat.
Yeah.
So really important, and understanding as a law enforcement officer what can come up with the need to slow down sometimes. So if you're assessing the safety situation and you know you're safe, slowing down can let you solve the problem, get to the point, protect the person way better than if you act quickly.
And E is for expect. Expect that you're going to get a good outcome. Expect that you can work it out and that it's going to have a positive outcome.
I think that's something we learned a lot working with different law enforcement agencies around the country, is how much the expectation sometimes is for a negative outcome, because there's so much difficulty that you all are dealing with right now with negative folks coming at you. And sometimes what we learned is when you get into a situation that may come out with a good outcome, that you're not necessarily, it's not like maybe what happened the day before. So we learn with horses that emotions are contagious. You walk into a situation, you're expecting negativity, you may get negativity back. You come in expecting a positive outcome, you may get positive back. So in the field of psychology, there's a lot of focus right now on what they call mindfulness. And what we refer to as mindfulness is just taking a moment to be aware of your surrounding, to be aware of yourself, to be aware of the person in front of you. And really, honestly, sometimes that just takes taking a deep, deep breath, slowing down, breathing a couple deep breaths before you react. And again, for law enforcement, this can be counterintuitive because often you're in a situation where it's a threat. When we're talking about communication disorders, we're not talking about people that are a threat to you. Primarily the threat is that the situation gets out of control and there's a difficulty in resolution because there's a miscommunication and understanding.
And we are so thankful that we received this grant from the American Legion Child and Welfare Foundation. We partnered with the Red Barn Foundation to create this project in the hopes that it will really do some good and that, you know, positive outcomes will come from this.
What we're hoping to do is help create a situation where families and law enforcement are better equipped to problem solve some of these scenarios that we see. In addition to this training tape that we're providing for all of you, the Red Barn is also helping create one for families. So we're seeing this as a collaborative process between families with communication disorder, children or themselves, and law enforcement. Because we know together we can be much more effective in helping each other. We're finding a lot of positive for many reasons. One reason is that we remind them yet again who these programs are really about and who law enforcement is really about. Helping people that need to be helped. So that's one piece of it. The other thing we're doing when we use the horses is we have a lot of fun. And often law enforcement comes in the morning and they're like, who are these crazy horse people? And by the end of the day, we have a lot of smiling, a lot of connection, and a lot of appreciation from both sides.